We often talk about tacit knowledge as a superpower of family businesses that protects them from larger competition and fuels their growth. But unfortunately, many family businesses struggle to pass down their knowledge, experience, and expert insight to the next generation. What goes wrong? Today, I'm talking with Meghan Lynch, CEO of 6 Point Strategy, to discuss this important topic and her experience helping family businesses master this superpower. So, I've heard you talk about tacit knowledge in family businesses as the unwritten guardrails that protect the value of the business. What do you mean by that, and why does it matter?
Yeah, usually with founders, although not only for founders, they have this like almost unconscious understanding about what their business is trusted for. So, like what their customers are actually buying from them and what decisions then for the company's strategy are kind of inbounds or out of bounds. And so it's not really about messaging or like public facing things. It's really more of a strategic and competitive differentiator. So it's like, which products are we going to pursue? Which customers might we walk away from? They work invisibly in the company because essentially this person is the guardrail. Their presence, their decisions, what they correct helps to keep the business sort of focused on where they're providing the most value. And when they're removed from that, you start to see some drift. You usually don't see any kind of major collapse in the business. It's really more like the customers might feel it before the family does. Something that they once found a lot of value in all of a sudden has been taken away from the way the business operates.
So it seems there might be an instinct here. Where does that come from? And is it the same in every business?
It actually will show up differently in a number of businesses. And it's one of the things that makes it particularly hard to put your finger on and pinpoint. The kinds of things that we often see are this personal experience of like, this leader once was the customer. They used to work in the industry that they are serving now. So they have this kind of insider knowledge of their customer because they were the customer. For others, it might be more like just long-time pattern recognition. They've just worked in the industry for, a few decades and they've seen the same things happen over and over. So they start to have a real deep understanding. And again, it kind of shows up almost like instinct of how a channel works or an industry works. Because it shows up differently, it can be really hard to recognize it when it comes or to figure out what exactly is this superpower.
What does it look like when the guardrails are missing? And how do families even find out?
Usually it's a combination of two things happen at once. The next generation of leadership will make some kind of decision that undervalues either like the reputation or this kind of instinctual superpower. Customers start to feel it. They just feel like something's off, something's been lost. When that happens, it's usually not happening because the next gens don't care or they're not capable. It's just because they see the obvious things, the visible things. They see the product or the structure or the pricing. Again, like the kind of things that we see are a founder that just knows this product is never going to sell in this industry, or this category is just too far out from our core. The kind of like example that I think people would most recognize would be Lego. Family-owned business, was run by non-family leadership. And at one point, this was in the late 90s when they started to customer behavior is changing. Kids are playing with more electronics. Lego starts to panic. They're like, oh my gosh, our sales are down. They had their first unprofitable year ever. And they're like, something's changed in the market and we have to change what we're doing. So they started doing theme parks and clothing and jewelry and just stuff that was not related to Lego. And what was missing was this filter of somebody saying, putting the guardrails back on, which eventually happened with a new CEO who brought the whole company back to the brick. That's the kind of drift that you start to see when you don't have that clarity of instinct to say, ooh, don't do that. That's not us.
You mentioned the next generation. Is having time to work in the business and shadow a leader enough for the next generation to understand these guardrails?
I think shadowing is the plan that most leaders have is like, yeah, just give me time, give them time with me. And they're smart. They'll figure it out. I figured it out. They'll figure it out. But shadowing transfers behavior. It lets you see what the person does, and then you can mimic that behavior. But what it doesn't do is tell you why they did what they did. A researcher, Gary Klein, who studied how firefighters make decisions, having to make these really high stakes decisions under pressure. How are they figuring out how to do it? And how do we train new firefighters to do that? And so he started interviewing them. And the very first interview he did, somebody who's been a captain for 12 years, has a ton of experience. And he's like, okay, I'm here to ask you about how you make decisions. And the guy looks at him and he goes, I don't think I've ever made a decision in my entire career. And Gary was like, what? Oops. I'm here to talk about decisions. Like, what do you mean? He's like, this is just what we do. And he's like, okay, well, can you show me the manual? And he's like, oh, it's not in the manual. It's just, you just know. And he heard the same thing from every firefighter that he talked to. We're not actively making decisions. We just know what to do. That's the same thing that I hear from founders of, we know what we do. And so what Klein figured out was that the way you transfer that information is through what he calls shadow boxing, but it's basically just walking through with the leader and not just shadowing them and watching what they do, but kind of pausing them and being like, whoa, okay, what else were you considering here? And start to get at the why behind the decisions that they're making, because the actions aren't really what matters. It's more of that judgment that they have to keep the company on track or to tell what to do or not to do. And that's really the piece that the next generation needs. They don't need to copy the behavior. They need to internalize the judgment. Yes, shadowing's great, but you also need to kind of add this other layer of asking questions and then running simulations for the next gen of saying, okay, this is now that we've kind of gotten the thinking behind what this leader does. What are you doing? How would you approach this situation? And then compare what they're doing. And they find that when you see the gap between your decision and then what the other person was seeing, it helps you understand, oh, okay, yeah, I wasn't even taking that into consideration. And then you can start to bring that judgment into your decision making. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of curiosity to be sitting with the leader and asking questions, and also obviously doing it while you still have time. It's a critical piece of succession planning, is to start to think about how are we transferring judgment, not just how are we transferring behavior.
So you've already given some hints. What is the process you've used in your work to actually make those guardrails explicit?
One example is we worked with a B2B product company, and the founder of this company had just like amazing product industry instinct. She was one of the people who had worked in the industry that they served. And so she was the customer. So she was totally doing the thing of, I'm building the products that I wanted as a customer, but I couldn't find. All of their product development that had really built the IP of the company was all kind of her brainchild. It was not done through market research. There was no process around it. It was really just she would come up with an idea and the team would execute it. And so when they started talking about succession, again, it's all in her head, and the product team could execute. They could do the steps, do the behavior, do the what. They had no understanding of the why. And so our work was really about not just trying to turn what she's doing into a checklist, but we had to kind of go through 3 steps. And so the first was that we had to take the decisions that she was making and turn them into standards that the product team could use as a filter. So if a product does not meet one of these criteria, then we start to understand that it's not going to be successful. The second piece was starting to build a customer insight system for them. So they needed to build that muscle into the structure of the company. So build a regular voice of customer listening mechanism, teach the team on how to take that information and turn it into insight and start to turn it into something that can affect the product development process. The third piece was that kind of firefighter style decision training, which was doing the shadowing with her, but with the extra step of calling the timeouts, right? Or running almost like simulations with her of, okay, this is what we're thinking of a product. What are the questions that you would ask? What are the other things that you would be considering? And then we would have the product development team run through those same scenarios. This is a product idea that somebody had. What are the things that you guys are thinking about? And then basically compare their answers for them. So show them like, oh, you were thinking about these 3 things, but she was thinking about these 2 extra criteria that you weren't thinking about, and start to bring some of those things just more obviously in front of their faces. And I don't think any single one of these things would have worked alone to transfer everything. And it's a lot to take. It's a lot of work. This is just one individual, but it's so core to the company that it was really the difference between, is this business going to survive into the next generation and stay strong? Or when this person leaves, is it just going to kind of, probably not collapse right away, but just kind of maybe fade out? The nice thing was that the same work also helped make them more scalable, right? Once we had the systems, then we could bring more people into it. So something that was once constrained by the founder's time now all of a sudden belongs to the team and the system. It helps with succession, but it also helps with growth and scale.
Oh, that's brilliant. So it seems that figuring out where the instinct lives has to come before figuring out how to transfer it. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like to go back to this situation, if we hadn't pinpointed this piece that, oh, you were the customer, and so that's why you know this piece, it would have been really hard to say, oh, we need a customer insight system because we have this kind of innate customer knowledge that nobody's naming. It's so invisible that we don't even understand it as customer knowledge. We just know it as her knowledge. Getting clear about where is this instinct coming from helps you figure out which approach we need to replicate it as we grow. So like that kind of customer instinct would be really different than if it's, decades of just working in the market, or a different approach than channel instinct. Like I have a dealer network that I know really well, or relationships.
Final question I have to ask. If a family business is suspecting that maybe these instincts aren't being transferred to the next gen, where should they start? What should they do?
One of the easiest things that they can do is just get curious, right? You just need to start asking questions. And I think one of the most insightful questions that a family can ask is, if the leader, if they weren't available, what are the decisions that the team would all of a sudden get wrong? Because they've probably seen that happen in the past, of like people making mistakes, the person's not available, somebody makes a judgment call, and it's just the wrong call. Then again, once you name, oh, these are the decisions that people would get wrong, then you can start to ask why. Why would they get that wrong? What is missing? And it usually starts to surface those categories of knowledge, again, kind of like that source information of, ooh, they would get this wrong because they would see an opportunity, but it wouldn't really sell, the customer wouldn't really buy it. Or, oh, they would get it wrong because they didn't fully understand the complexity of the relationships. The idea is to just kind of really focus on step one of identifying the source of the knowledge and kind of start to track that back. And then again, once you understand where that instinct is coming from, then it becomes so much easier to figure out how are we going to transfer it. If anybody's suspecting that this might be some kind of a gap for them, let's figure out what people are getting wrong and start to figure out the source.
This was so helpful. Thank you so much. I'm Kim Edelston with familybusiness.org, and we're talking to Meghan Lynch, CEO of 6 Point Strategy. Thank you so much. I know this is going to be incredibly helpful to so many of our viewers.
Thanks, Kim.